During the mid-1800s, the British East India Company began to monopolize trade and commerce in South Asia. By 1857, desperate Indian soldiers sparked an uprising against the occupation. This event was perceived as the first battle for India's independence. Yet the revolt failed, and in 1858 the dissolution of the East India Company transferred control of India to British Parliament. It was amidst this oppressive atmosphere that Iqbal's family descended to the Punjab from the mountains of Kashmir. Originally Hindu Brahmins, they converted to Islam and settled in a town called Sialkot. In 1877, Muhammad Iqbal was born. Iqbal's father, Sheikh Nur Muhammad, was a respected tailor with a genuine love for Islam. Well known amongst the mystics and scholars of Sialkot, Nur Muhammad encouraged his son to read the Quran as though it were being revealed to him directly. While most of the youth attended classes geared towards Islamic studies, it became apparent to Iqbal's mentor, Mir Hassan, that the intelligent young man would have a much brighter future in the academic world.
His teacher, of course, managed to persuade his father that he should not be sent to a maktab or to a madrasa. Rather, he should be sent to a modern school.
Mir Hassan opened the mind of his young student with Urdu poetry. At the age of 18, Iqbal left for Lahore. It was a vibrant city, full of admiration for the arts. Preoccupied with poetry, he flunked his law examinations. In the midst of an unhappy arranged marriage, Iqbal came into contact with another teacher who would change his life. Thomas Arnold was a British scholar with a deep respect for Islam. The two men forged a great friendship, and when Arnold left India to return to England, he encouraged Iqbal to pursue a higher education abroad.
But what Arnold did is to basically say, you know, you're one of the brightest guys I've taught. Instead of simply being a lawyer, which of course he was trained to be, so, you know, think about this larger possibility that you could be a scholar.
When Iqbal was 28, he left Lahore for England in 1905. During this period, he achieved his bar in law at Lincoln's Inn and his master's degree in Cambridge. Immersed in education, he withdrew himself from social life. He experienced Europe in its best and worst conditions, but was alarmed by what he perceived as unstable nationalism and unforgiving justification for colonial domination. His once frequent writing came to a near halt. He later described his experience as a critical moment in his life. One of the few poems he wrote during this period dramatically criticized the materialistic worldview he had witnessed in the West firsthand.
O people of the West, the city of God is not a marketplace. What you've been holding as currency will turn out to be counterfeit. Your civilization will commit suicide with its own dagger, because a nest built on a frail bough cannot be durable.
Living in England had showed Iqbal the reality of colonialism on a much broader scale. Although just as gifted as his peers, Iqbal felt treated as a second-class citizen, a sensation he was happy to be rid of in 1907, when he continued his education in Germany. It would be the only time in his life when he was not a subject to the British throne. When Iqbal returned to India in 1908, he was a changed man.
And he comes back to India and he begins to reconnect with his own people, and what takes his breath away is what he finds the state of denial, and he finds that his own fellow men and women, as if they have locked themselves out of that festivity, of that festival of change. And this is an amazing struggle to dawn upon his own people that there is this banquet of change happening. Be a part of it, or you'd be too late.
Iqbal was encouraging the people of South Asia to carry their traditions forward and align them with the future. In 1911, Just as European powers began to occupy the majority of the Muslim world, Iqbal's writing became less romantic and more political. His words spoke directly to the community, encouraging the active transformation of individuals.
He's stimulating them by his poetry to say, wake up, you know, the world is beautiful, God is good, there's no reason for you to be depressed and miserable like that.
He taunts the contemporary Muslims and he compares them to their great ancestors. He says, you guys, you the contemporaries, suicide is your way of life. Your forebears, they were people of dignity and self-confidence.
Iqbal was trying to remind Muslims of their great heritage. Between the 8th and 13th centuries, the golden age of Islam occurred. Sweeping advances in science, philosophy, medicine, and education took place, and a unique understanding and exchange of ideas developed between cultures. The single most influential figure on Iqbal's thought would emerge at the height of this period. The great mystic poet Rumi was forced to leave Afghanistan in the early 1200s due to the invasion of the Mongol hordes. He fled to Anatolia, modern-day Konya, Turkey. Like the Sufis who followed him, he spent his life trying to understand humanity's relationship to the divine. Though the two men were separated by over 600 years, Iqbal considered Rumi his spiritual guide.
Rumi's whirling dervishes, what do they symbolize? Why do they go anti-clockwise? Because all the planets go that way. Why should they whirl? Whirl, they're representing the whole universe. And why the master remains stationary? He represents God. So apparently they in fact depict the movement of the entire universe when they dance, with one hand upwards and one hand downwards, showing, symbolizing the communication between the heaven and earth.
During his time in Germany, Iqbal had achieved his PhD in Persian metaphysics. Much of the vast history of Eastern mysticism followed the belief that all of nature was a part of God. Iqbal believed this created a dangerous rift between personal responsibility and vague spiritual principles. In November of 1914, both Iqbal's mother and his daughter Miraj passed away. Amidst tragedy at home and the mounting tensions of World War I, Iqbal began writing a book in Persian titled The Secrets of the Self. Influenced greatly by Rumi, it was a call to action and an illustration of the power we have as individuals.
Out of harm. Man is essentially a force, or rather a combination of forces.
The situation in the subcontinent was changing rapidly, and by the time the First World War had ended in 1918, well over 1 million Indians had served the British with the hopes of achieving self-government. When this did not happen, the vast disappointment ushered in a new era of unrest in the communities of India. By this time, Iqbal had become a well-respected poet, not just in the Punjab, but throughout South Asia and parts of Europe. In Lahore, people would visit Iqbal's home regularly. Everyone from students to politicians sought advice, and all were welcome. He would rarely leave his house. His days were divided between reading, writing, and discussions that could run late into the night, covering topics ranging from the nature of existence to the communal problems of India. Becoming ever more respected as a man of the people, his work continued to express his main convictions about the changing political landscape. Iqbal continually tried to appeal to the West through his writing, but his message was not being received. The people of India, however, were listening. In 1924, Iqbal's wife Sardar gave birth to their son, Javed.
At a later period in my life, Pakistan movement had started, and Jinnah used to come and visit us. I still remember the day when it was probably 6th of June, when I was specially asked by my father in the morning that I should join him at 4 o'clock in his room and bring my autograph book. He said, there's a person coming here. He's coming at 4 o'clock and you'll be present in the room. So I went in the room with my autograph book, and I noticed Jinnah sitting next to him. So I advanced my autograph book towards Jinnah, and he wrote his signature, made his signatures on it with the date. And then he looked up towards me and he said, do you also write poetry? So I said, no, sir. The next question came, then what are you going to do when you grow up? You know, he spoke English like an Englishman. So I had no answer, so I just kept silence. So he turned toward my father and said to him, he doesn't answer. So my father answered him. He said he won't answer. He's waiting for you to tell him what he is to do.
Jinnah would eventually become the first president of Pakistan. But before this, he would turn to Iqbal regularly for advice and spiritual guidance. Though not a religious man himself, Jinnah became convinced Iqbal's concerns for the Muslims of India were justified. The two men forged a friendship that became crucial for the future of India. Negotiations between the Muslim League and the Hindu Congress began to deteriorate in light of irreconcilable differences. With no agreement on how the new political system would be formed, the possibility of a two-state solution became likely. December 29, 1930, Iqbal made his famous Allahabad address, in which he became the first to mention the idea of Pakistan as an autonomous region in the subcontinent.
I would like to see the Punjab, Northwest Frontier Province, Sindh and Balochistan amalgamated into a single state. Self-government within the British Empire or without the British Empire. The formation of a consolidated Northwest Indian Muslim state appears to me to be the final destiny of the Muslims, at least of Northwest India.
In 1931, Iqbal visited Andalusia, Spain, which had once been the home to the Islamic Renaissance. He visited the famous Mosque of Cordoba, which had been converted into a Catholic church in the 15th century. Reminiscent of a glorious age long past, he began to pray in the magnificent structure. Here he was inspired by the power of time.
Day succeeding to night, molder of all time's works. Day succeeding to night, fountain of life and death. Chains of the days and nights, woven by him that is, into his being's robe. What other sense have your nights? What have your days but one blank current of time, empty of sunset or dawn? All art's wonders arise only to vanish once more. All things built on this earth sink, as if built on sand.
In his later life, Iqbal would describe the world as composed through contradictions which hide their inner unity. With difference comes distinction. Day and night, love and reason, mind and body. At the outset, all of these appear pitted against one another. When we look deeper, we see that there is a dialogue taking place. Iqbal was asked to prepare a speech for New Year's Day, which would be broadcast over all India radio. Only a few months before his death, the address would be the poet's final plea for human consciousness to rise to meet its own challenges. On April 21, 1938, Muhammad Iqbal died in Lahore. Over 20,000 mourners flooded the streets of the city. Muslims, Hindus, and Sikhs all paid their respects to the man who had become known throughout the subcontinent as one of the most important thinkers and political activists of his time. Written in Persian on his tomb were words appealing to the same universal message he had upheld for his entire life.
We belong to the garden and descend from the same ancestors. Distinctions of color and race are forbidden to us. We are the harvests of a new spring.
He was buried next to Badshahi Mosque in Lahore, where as a young man he had once read his poems to large gatherings. Dirt from his grave was brought to Konya, Turkey, and an honorary tomb was respectfully placed outside of Rumi's own grave. Not even a year after his death, World War II began. With England's promise of independence, communal tension in India grew to a breaking point. By the end of the war, England was nearly bankrupt and was forced to leave India virtually overnight. The result was one of the largest and most rapid population transfers in history. Over 10 million people left their homes, and amidst the paranoia and confusion, well over 1 million lives were lost.